Today's mini lecture is on intelligence. To begin, I'd like to introduce you to Lewis Terman, who is a pioneer in educational psychology in the early 20th century. He is best known for creating the Stanford-Binet IQ test, which is an IQ test that many of us have taken. Terman, however, was a prominent eugenicist, and he was also a member of the Human Betterment Foundation. So eugenics is the theory that through selective breeding, the human race can be improved. In the United States, for example, by the 1930s, over 30 states had eugenics laws involving the mandatory sterilization of people said to be feeble-minded or simply undesirable. It is estimated that between 60 and 70,000 sterilizations took place under these laws. And in Germany, for example, eugenics paved the way for the Holocaust. So in 1916, Terman published his first version of the Stanford-Binet IQ test. And the first mass administration of the IQ test was done with 1.7 million soldiers during World War I. Terman served in the military while conducting psychological tests, and he worked to categorize recruits. The recruits who earned scores of A would be trained as officers, while those who earned scores of D or E would never receive officer training, and in fact were sent to the front lines where the death rates were the highest. After the war, Terman pressed for IQ tests to be used in the schools to improve the efficiency of schools. So Terman administered his Stanford-Binet IQ test, which was written in English, to Spanish speakers and unschooled African Americans, and he concluded this, and I quote, "Borderline deficiency is very, very common among Spanish, Indian, and Mexican families of the Southwest and also among Negroes. Their dullness seems to be racial or at least inherent in the family stocks from which they come. Children of this group should be segregated into separate classes. They cannot master abstractions, but they can often be made into efficient workers. From a eugenics point of view, they constitute a grave problem because of their unusually prolific breeding." This quote comes from a book called The Measure of Intelligence, published in 1916, pages 91 to 92. So, Terman proposed that IQ tests should be used to classify children. He believed IQ was inherited, and it was the strongest predictor of a person's success in life. While today we recognize the drastically distorted thinking of classifying a person's IQ based on their race, we still unfortunately do classify children according to IQ in public schools. It is impossible, for example, to complete a public school education without having taken a number of standardized tests. We have all taken the CSAP or the TCAP or the SAT or the ACT, which are all forms of intelligence tests. In 1921, Terman began a long-term study of gifted children, and he called this the genetic study of genius. He put together a team of field workers who screened 250,000 elementary school children in California, and he identified 1,470 children whose IQs range from 140 to 200 points. This group of young geniuses was called the termites, and this would become one of the most famous psychological studies in history. For the rest of his life, Terman watched over these geniuses. He tracked their educational attainment, their marriages, their illnesses, their mental health, and their job histories. Terman even said, quote, "It is impossible to read a newspaper account of any sort of competition or activity in which California boys and girls participate without finding among the winners the names of one or more members of our gifted group. This group had quote, unquote, heroic stature. Terman believed that the termites were destined to be the future elite of the United States. When Terman died in 1956, the long-term study of these gifted individuals continued, and it still continues today through Stanford University, and it will continue until the last of the termites passes away or withdraws from the study. So what exactly can we learn from Terman's study of genius? A sociologist named Pitterim Sorokin demonstrated that if Terman had simply put together a randomly selected group of children from the same family backgrounds as the termites and not even looked at their IQ, he would have ended up with a group doing about as many high-achieving things as the painstakingly selected group of geniuses. Late in his life, Terman wrote in the 4th volume of his Genetic Studies of Genius the following quote, "We have seen that intellect and achievement are far from perfectly correlated." So what can we learn about the predictive value of IQ? Arthur Jensen, in his book called Bias in Mental Testing, discovered that there is a threshold for success. In other words, an IQ that is about 1 standard deviation above the mean, or approximately 115 points, is strongly correlated with whether or not one can graduate from a 4-year college. Beyond this, the IQ level becomes relatively unimportant in terms of occupational aspirations and a criteria of success. So think of the analogy of a basketball player. To play professional basketball, you need to be at least 6 feet tall. With all things being equal, it's probably better to be 6'1" instead of 6 foot. And it's probably better to be 6'2" instead of 6'1". However, beyond a certain point, height stops mattering that much. Other things start to matter, such as ball handling skills. So a player who is 6'7" is not automatically better than someone who is 6'5". A basketball player has to be just tall enough. The same way a person has to be just smart enough. Above 115, IQ differences at the upper part of the scale have far less impact on success than certain traits of personality and character. So now let's look at some other aspects of intelligence, and then we're going to look at 2 alternative ways of looking at intelligence. For the first half of the 20th century, researchers gathered data that led them to believe that intellectual ability rises in childhood, peaks or reaches its highest point in adolescence, and then it declines steadily as age advances. More recently, however, researchers have begun to doubt whether there is an inevitable decline in cognitive functioning that is associated with age. A study by Bailey in 1966 suggested that the typical person at age 36 had improved their IQ in areas of vocabulary, comprehension, and information. Then, the Seattle longitudinal study, which was completed most recently in 2005, later confirmed Bailey's findings that people improve in most mental abilities during their adulthood until about age 50. And it is not until someone reaches their 80s that every cognitive ability shows age-related average declines. Throughout the world, studies have shown that IQ scores increase from one generation to the next. Countries have seen generational increases of between 5 and 25 points. This trend is called the Flynn Effect, And because of it, IQ tests are renormed every 15 years. In the 1960s, Raymond Cattell and John Horn differentiated two types of intelligence, and they called these two types fluid intelligence and crystallized intelligence. So fluid intelligence is a flexible reasoning, and it is made up of the basic mental abilities such as inductive reasoning, abstract thinking, and speed of thinking. It is important to note that the Flynn effect appears to occur more strongly on tests that measure fluid intelligence than crystallized intelligence. And this might suggest that we are simply getting better at thinking abstractly. Next, crystallized intelligence is the accumulation of facts, information, and knowledge that comes with education and experience. So, fluid intelligence declines during adulthood, although this decline is temporarily masked or covered over by an increase in crystallized or concrete factual intelligence. Psychologists have mounting evidence that says the adult mind continuously refines its ways of doing things, in part to compensate for losses of efficiency. For example, in one study, Stanley Rappaport of the National Institute of Health used MRIs to compare blood flow in the brains of younger and older adults as they completed a visual matching task. Since blood flow mirrors neural activity, the resulting MRIs show that even when their reaction times and their accuracy were the same, younger and older subjects had distinctly different MRIs. This indicates that the two groups are using different neural networks to perform the same task. In a second study, Timothy Salthouse of the Georgia Institute of Technology compared two groups of typists. One group was college age and the other group was in their 60s. The subjects in the two age groups both typed at 60 words per minute. Since reaction time increases with age, it might be expected that the accuracy of the older typists would suffer as they attempted to maintain their speed. In fact, however, the older typists maintained both speed and accuracy, but they used strategies that made their typing more efficient. For example, they tended to read ahead in the text to anticipate keystrokes. They also made fewer unnecessary finger and hand movements than their younger counterparts did. The neural networks involved in typing appear to have been reshaped to compensate for losses in motor skills and other age-related changes. So now let's look at an alternate theory of intelligence that is put forth by Yale psychologist Robert Sternberg. When Sternberg was a child, he did not perform well on standardized intelligence tests, nor did many other people that turned out to be highly successful in their own specialties. So are these people lacking intelligence? Sternberg, who received the American Psychological Association's prestigious award for distinguished contributions to psychology, thinks not, and he argues that traditional IQ tests overlook certain important aspects of intelligence. So Sternberg proposed that intelligence is composed of three distinctive parts: analytic intelligence, creative intelligence, and practical intelligence. Sternberg suggests that traditional intelligence tests focus only on analytic intelligence, which is also academic intelligence. Such tests measure how efficiently people process and analyze information. These intelligence tests fail, however, to measure creative intelligence. So according to Sternberg, creative intelligence involves the capacity to be flexible and innovative when dealing with new situations. traditional intelligence tests also fail to recognize the practical aspect of intelligence, which may be the reason why IQ tests are only weakly correlated with success in life. This real-world or practical intelligence develops throughout life, is probably the basis for occupational expertise, and more generally, it gives people the ability to size up situations in order to adapt to them, to shape them to their liking, or to quit them in the hopes of selecting something that is more comfortable. So people with practical intelligence know how to use inside information or tacit knowledge in order to get ahead, in order to win a promotion, or to cut through bureaucratic red tape. Practical intelligence is very useful in adulthood when the demands of life are omnipresent. And again, interestingly, practical intelligence is unrelated to traditional intelligence as measured by IQ tests. The second theory of intelligence that we're going to look at is put forth by Gardner, and he believes that intelligence is much more than IQ, because a high IQ, in the absence of productivity, does not really equal intelligence in the real world. So therefore, instead of IQ being a single entity described by one IQ score, Gardner views intelligence as many things. Gardner has proposed that intelligence is a broad range of capacities, and each of these capacities has to have a localized brain function. In other words, that functioning must originate in a specific area of the brain. So, in summary, Gardner states that there are 8 autonomous intelligences, and these are linguistic intelligence, logical mathematical intelligence, musical intelligence, spatial intelligence, bodily kinesthetic intelligence, naturalistic intelligence, self-understanding, and social understanding. So which kind of intelligence is most valued depends on the specific events in each person's life, and that's partly because of the culture and the cohort, and also partly because of that individual's age. So in conclusion, in 1996, a panel of experts was convened by the American Psychological Association to prepare an authoritative report on intelligence. So here are 2 major conclusions from that report. Number 1, it is widely agreed that standardized tests do not sample all forms of intelligence. Obvious examples include creativity, wisdom, practical sense, and social sensitivity. Despite the importance of these abilities, very little is known about them, or how they develop, or what factors influence their development, or how they are related to more traditional intelligence measures. And secondly, although there are no important sex differences in overall intelligence test scores, substantial differences do appear for specific abilities. Males typically score higher on visual, spatial, and beginning in middle childhood, mathematical skills. Females excel on a number of verbal measures. It's important to note that sex hormone levels are clearly related to some of these differences. However, social factors also play a role. So this concludes my mini lecture on intelligence.